Hello, my name's Kate Hughes and I run Cook Academy near Winchester, and today I'm going to show you a lovely recipe. Today I'm going to show you how to make old-fashioned beef stew, which is a very useful skill to have. You can use all sorts of different meats. It doesn't have to be beef, you could use lamb, but it's a slow cooking technique, it's a casserole, and it's a very handy skill to have. So I'll just take you through the ingredients. We've got some chuck steak here, which is about 350 grams of chuck steak, and chuck steak is from the shoulder of the cow, which has a little bit of connective tissue in it, as you can see. We're also going to be using some vegetables. So we've got an onion, a couple of carrots and some swede. We've also got some herbs. We've got fresh thyme, bay leaves, and then some beef stock. So you can use a concentrated beef stock rather than having to make your own if you don't have the time. And then we just have some water as well. So the first stage of the recipe is to deal with the meat, and as I said, it comes from the neck of the cow. Any large bits of fat that you want to chop off, so this large bit on the side here, just chop that bit off. But don't go nuts and chop loads off, because you actually want some of that fat to give you flavour into the sauce. So we're going to chop it in half that way, and then into largish chunks across the grain the other way. So you want to end up with lumps of meat which are about 4 or 5 centimetres cubed. No smaller than that really, because otherwise, as I say, they'll end up looking too small. And same on the other side of the meat, cutting across the grain again. Next thing we're going to do is brown the meat. We're making a brown stew, so the emphasis is very much on browning the meat and browning all the vegetables, and that gives you lots of colour and flavour in your sauce. First of all, we're going to season it with a little bit of salt and pepper. Salt will help to brown the outside of the meat. Cook this quantity of meat in 2 different batches. If you are doing a big volume of meat, you don't want to cook too many bits of meat at the same time, because it will lower the heat of the pan and it'll end up just being grey and boiling, and all the water will come out of the meat. Whereas if it's nice and hot and you don't put too much meat in the pan, it should end up being nice and brown all over the outside. In the pan I've got a little bit of sunflower oil. Just need a tablespoon or so of the oil. Because beef has quite a lot of fat in it, you don't need to put too much fat in the pan. And if you can hear that, it should sizzle when it goes in. That means the pan's nice and hot. It's got a really good deep chestnut brown colour to it, and you lift the meat out from the frying pan into a casserole dish or something that can go into the oven. And then we've got one more batch of meat to brown, and I've got some water here, and you just splash in a little bit of water, put it back on the heat, and use a wooden spatula to scrape up all the brown sediment that's stuck to the bottom of the pan. We've got 2 reasons for deglazing the pan, which is what this is called. One is to clean it out before you start browning the next batch of meat, and the other is to give you all the colour and flavour in your stew. The next batch of meat, and do exactly the same thing. Let it brown all over for about 5 minutes, and then we'll add that to that pan there. And then we're going to think about doing the vegetables to go with the meat. So first of all, I'm going to slice up an onion. Okay, so once you've sliced your onions, get those into the pan, and another couple of tablespoons of oil, and then heat the onions up a little bit. A couple of carrots. Try and chop them reasonably chunky so that they don't disintegrate, because they've got 2.5 hours cooking time. So they're quite chunky, probably about 1 centimetre thick. We've got some peeled swede, and same again, those can go into small chunks. And and then we'll throw those in the pan and brown them as well. Now that the vegetables are brown, is to put a few fresh thyme sprigs in and a bay leaf or two. If you've only got dried ones, that's fine as well. Chuck those into the casserole. The vegetables are really nice and brown now, so they can all go in. And you've probably got a lot of colour on the bottom of this pan here, so just chuck another bit of water in. And then tip that over your meat and vegetables. And then we're going to add half a pint of stock. You need to look at the packet instructions to see how much of a stock cube or how much of a stock you need to make up about half a pint of stock. But the quantity of liquid we add isn't always exact with this. It's enough water or stock to cover the meat and the vegetables. So you start off with half a pint and see how you go, but you might need to top up with a little bit more liquid. So I'm just going to put about a tablespoon of this lovely dark concentrated stock in here. So now you've got all your vegetables and meat in there. Put enough water in just to cover the vegetables or your stock that you've already made up in your measuring jug. Put it back onto the heat just to bring it up to the boil. So the stew is now boiling, or rather it's at boiling point. You don't really want to boil stew because it toughens the protein. And we're going to put it in an oven at gas mark 3 or 150 degrees centigrade for about 2 hours and then have a look at it. Been in the oven for about an hour and a half, and I'm just going to add the pearl barley, just about 15 grams of it, sprinkle it into the stew, and that'll be in there for the next hour, for the last hour of cooking time. So just make sure it's all submerged underneath the liquid. Also, now that you're looking at the casserole, if you need to add any more water at this point, if the meat's sticking up over the level of the water, just add a little bit of cold water and put the lid back on, put it back into the oven. It's had nearly 2.5 hours cooking time, and the way to see whether the meat is done is to lift a little bit of it out and get a couple of spoons and just, it should fall apart as easily as that. It's really, really tender. It should just sort of crumble apart like that. Next thing you need to do is to lift out the vegetables and meat, and we'll reduce down the sauce to make a nice thick gravy to go with the meat. The sauce for the stew is now reduced a little bit, but it should be just coating the back of the spoon slightly. And taste it as well to see whether you've got a nice balance of flavours, and if you need to add a little bit more stock to give it more meaty flavour, that's fine, or you can just add salt and pepper. Pop all the bits back into that sauce. Try and remove the thyme sprigs and the bay leaf because you wouldn't want somebody eating those. And then pop it into a dish. And that's how to make old-fashioned beef stew.